All right, so welcome back to our new topic. Next topic from our module five, which was risk management and analysis. Right now, we're moving on to our module six, session one. So I decided to merge the module five sessions one and two because we had exam week last week, and there were no classes that time because it was exam week. So I decided to go merge session one and two on Monday for our remote coach sessions. And for now, in module six, session one, we're going to be doing remote lessons as well. However, for sections 9 to 12, I decided to go face to face. However, for all of you, I'll be doing alternate face to face probably next week for future announcements regarding to your final project for P2 and P3. So right now we're going to be discussing Module 6, Session 1, which is Project Risk Management. Okay, so we're going to have a review first before we start off with this topic. So our journey so far in IT project management, where during P1 we've discussed about the module 1 to 4, right? So in module 1 we've defined a project. I assume most of you already know what project is, right? Now project is a temporary effort that solves a specific problem, and it consists of constraints, which are the features of that project. So a project becomes a project due to these limitations or constraints. So what are these constraints? They have scope, time, cost, and quality. Now in module one, we've also got to introduce with methodologies like waterfall and agile. So in module one, it consists for the idea of defining what project is. Now in module two, we learn how to manage a project. Since we've already know in module one that agile is a flexible approach, we've appreciated that idea. So we move on to module two, which is Scrum, a framework for agile. So we've learned more how flexible agile is by using the Scrum framework and also learning the Kanban as well, which is the visual board where we can see the progress of our project. Again, from defining a project, we move on to managing a project. Now in module 3, we learn how to build a project. Now, since we've already know what methodologies are, we've learned where to start building our project. And that is why we've learned about SDLC stages. Now, SDLC stages also have SDLC models. Now, these models uh, are using the same SDLC stages, but the approach of them are different depending on the project being created. Now, from defining a project, managing a project, to building a project, we are now moving on to module 4, which is executing a project. Of course, we can actually define what project is. We can manage what project means. And we can also build a project. However, is that project worth in building because of that idea, right? So in module 4, we move on to feasibility study and project charter, which is the execution of a project. Is your project worth building? Is your project worth the resources that it needs for us to, be used by the people that needs it? So that's module 4. And last Monday, we've talked about module 5, which uh, we discussed about requirements gathering and analysis. So, from defining, managing, building, executing a project, we now know how to gather a project. So, by adding the gathering or requirements gathering process of building our project, we learn to make our project more feasible. Hence, why we have a lot of reasons to execute this specific project. So right now in this session, we've moved on to module 6, which is to identify the risk of our project. So our topic for today is about project risk management in IT project management. All right, so before we start with this topic, I want you to think of your project. Maybe some of you are still currently finding clients, right? And most of you are still thinking of a project you have. Now, in the scenarios that you've learned so far in your groupings or any project in mind, I want you to think, and I'll give you 5 to 10 seconds to think of that project for this scenario. Okay, so once you've already done thinking of a project, every project balances with four constraints, right? From module one that I've discussed earlier or from the previous months, every project is always balanced with four constraints. Now, these four constraints are what we call limitations. Now, limitations are specific from the project that we are building. Of course, we cannot add a feature based on the project that, or maybe we cannot add features that doesn't relate to a project. That is why we are adding a limitation or a constraint. So what are these four constraints? As a review, we have the scope, which are the things that we must build. We have the time, or the things that, or the project, or when we will be finishing the project. We also have the cost, what can we spend of the project, or the quality, how well must that project work. Now, these four constraints consist of defining what project is. Now, based on the project that you think earlier, question here is that which constraints among the four here is most at risk in your project? Now, what are constraints that would probably cause risk in your project? Is it scope? Is it time? Is it cost? Is it quality? And why? I'll give you 5 seconds to think first and reflect what are or which of these constraints that would cause a risk. Okay, maybe some of you, I assume, uh, maybe some of you would say, oh, the biggest risk that I could probably experience based on these constraints is probably time, because there are deadlines that we cannot probably deliver this specific feature, or maybe costs, we cannot spend this much to build this project, or maybe the scope, there are lacking features that needs to be implemented so that we'll be able to define our project properly or solidify the project that we are building. So there are a lot of potential options or potential risks that we can experience based on these four constraints from the project that we are building, right? So a small uncertainty can become a major project problem. Now, every small uncertainty, the reason why is that wherever we think of a project, we always think of long-term process. Meaning that whenever or whatever problem that is, or whatever scale or how big the problem or how small the problem is from the beginning, it needs to be solved immediately because it might cause a major project problem in the future. Now, from your project that I gave you earlier on the intro, I want you to imagine a specific scenario. Imagine your project 2 days before its deployment, meaning your project is going to be delivered or going to be delivered by the clients. Let's say, for example, and then during your testings, prior from the 2 days before the deployment, it reveals that there are security vulnerabilities that may expose sensitive records. Now, what would you do? No, what should your team do? Now, these are the choices: deploy anyway, fast but unsafe, or B, delay and fix, it protects quality, or C, ignore it, risk becomes an issue in the future. So I'll give you 5 to 10 seconds, or pause this video to pick the best options in actually approaching this problem. All right, so the answer to that is delay and fix, because you don't have a choice. You're already given 2 days, and there are vulnerabilities involved, which is a high risk if you're going to implement it on time. If you're going to deploy it anyway, there's going to be a problem in the future because it has a security vulnerability, which is very unsafe. If we're going to ignore it, risk becomes an issue because no one's knowing it and only you, and the fact that you're ignoring it could cause potential problems in the long term. So the best option here is just to delay the project and fix it so that once you deliver it, everything is packed and normal. That is why we're going to be learning project risk management, how do we identify what is the better way to approach these risks in order for us to deliver a project that could solidify, and in the long run it can be scalable, at the same time being able to mitigate a smaller risk as much as possible. So, in the overview for this topic, we're going to be explaining the concept of project risk in IT project management. We identify common risk encountered in IT projects and describe the project risk management process. And number four is to analyze risk using probability and impact assessment. And number five is recommend appropriate risk response strategies. We're going to be handling different types of processes in our next sessions and apply risk management concepts to a simple IT project scenario. Of course, in every IT project management activities, we usually go in with scenarios so that we're going to grasp a real world scenario we're in. We can actually relate it to the actual process of mitigating the risks that we will encounter. So, what is project risk? Now, project risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, can have a positive or negative effect on a project's objectives, such as scope, time, cost, or quality, or the four constraints. Now, when we say project risk, it is always uncertain. It is an uncertain event or condition, just like maybe lottery. You're taking a risk. Maybe in investments, you're taking a risk. It is always uncertain. That's why we have this called FUD: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You always start off with uncertainty. It is an uncertain event or a condition. The reason why it is says condition, because there's two that might occur in those conditions that you will have in that risk or uncertainty. It's either going to be on a positive direction or a negative direction. These effects will affect these objectives below, which is the scope, time, cost, or quality. Now, project risks are common due to these reasons. Number one is rapid technological change, which makes sense. Just like AI, there's a high risk of actually, being able to over rely on it. There's a high risk of removing or getting out a job. There's a lot of risk involved in terms of technology. Second is unclear or changing requirements. In terms of projects context, there are different types of features that you need to put in your project. However, there are some things that might be unclear. Maybe there's miscommunication between your teams, etc., which could cause problems in the future. And third is limited technical skills. Maybe the manpower doesn't really handle technical side of the project, and it is more of a designing and more conceptualizing side, but is not really focused on a more technical or functional side of your project. Or lastly, which is the most common issue, is security and data privacy concerns. Maybe most of your teams in a project doesn't really practice maybe a basic way of actually mitigating all those errors, especially in security reasons. Now, there are actually types of IT project risks, and we're going to be identifying them one by one. So, these types of IT risks are technical risk, schedule risk, cost risk, resource risk, security risk, and requirements risk. Now, in technical risk, system failures, this consists of software bugs or integration issues. This is more of like a technical aspect of your project. So you imagine your project having a technical risk is usually common from bugs, from different types of data that is being placed there that doesn't really align from the project that you have. Those are technical risks. When we say schedule risk, it is more of involved in time. Could be poor estimates, dependencies, or project delays, or maybe not meeting up the deadlines properly. We also have number three, which is cost risk. It is more of like budget overruns, unexpected expenses. Maybe you cannot afford, or maybe you overspend, and then causing it, maybe in the long run, could cause problems because you didn't really apply or you don't have resources enough to for your projects to be fulfilled. Number four is resource risk. these are your skill shortages, high staff turnover. Maybe you're laying off staff, maybe there's too much staff, but there's no use, or maybe there are less staff of working on with your project, but didn't really know or doesn't really meet proper deadlines because you have limited manpower. And number five, we have security risks, which is data breaches, cyber attacks, which is pretty much more common. And I think most of you could actually relate, especially in projects that has vulnerabilities of data that are easier to be penetrated in terms of simply logging in, or maybe there's penetration testing that could potentially damage the project because it is not secure enough. And number six is requirements risk. There are frequent changes or unclear requirements, and these are the most common thing that in terms of building your projects, requirements risk is one of the common issues in terms of building your project. Maybe you're creating too much changes and then there's miscommunication involved between you and your team, and then once that specific features didn't really implement it, there's a lot of problems that happens over time, especially in the building process. Now, before we actually go on with our activities, let's go ahead and review first the topics that we discussed earlier. Again, a developer leaves halfway to the project. Now, can you guess what type of risk does this scenario have? A developer leaves halfway to the project. Is it A, technical, B, resource, C, schedule, or D, security? I'll give you 5 seconds. You can just pause the video to answer this question. Okay, the answer to this is letter B, which is resource. Now, going back to the chart that we have earlier, resource risk talks more about the people, the manpower behind the project that you are building. So in this scenario, it says a developer leaves halfway to the project. And in this case, it is resource because the developer left, which causes a lot of risk. Now, again, a review before we end. What is project risk? A project risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, can have different types of condition. It could be on a positive or negative side, which affects the objectives or the constraints of your project. And again, what are six common types of IT project risks? We have technical risks, schedule risks, cost risks, resource risk, security, and requirements risk. All right, so in your module, I want you to answer the activity here in a let's practice activity, which from activity one and activity two talks more about the risk identification and probability impact. Now, I want you to list three possible risks of variety. I want you to read the instructions there and just follow because everything is just placed there already. So we're going to be moving on to our session 2, module 6, right after doing this activity. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching this module 6 session, and I will see you guys to the next session.